The morning of the hearing, the air outside the courthouse was sharp and cold, yet it felt heavier than the chill should have made it. My heart was pounding, my hands clammy, and every step I took toward the tall, imposing building seemed to echo loudly in my skull. I could feel every eye, real or imagined, watching me, judging me, anticipating my failure. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, there was a fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. I kept thinking of him, my father, the man who had walked away, leaving us to fend for ourselves. Every memory of his absence surged up like a tide, each wave carrying the weight of betrayal, abandonment, and unspoken questions. Why us? Why leave? Did he even care? And yet, as much as I hated him for leaving, I realized that his abandonment had forged a strength in us that no mansion, no lawyer, no second wife could ever undo. The courthouse steps were slick with dew. I paused halfway up, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the folder clutched in my hands. Inside were years of research, deeds, letters, notarized statements, all painstakingly collected, every detail checked, double-checked, and memorized. I could almost feel the past generations of my family pressing against me, urging me forward. This was not just a fight over land, this was a fight for legacy, for truth, for honor. My siblings were behind me, their expressions a mix of anxiety and determination. My eldest sister gave me a small nod, barely perceptible, but enough to anchor me. "We're ready," she said, her voice steady, though I could see the tremor in her hands. "Ready?" I whispered back, though my throat felt dry. "Are we really ready for this?" She met my gaze and smiled faintly. "We have no choice. We either do this, or everything is lost. And we will not lose." The doors of the courthouse loomed ahead, carved wood glinting faintly in the early sunlight. As we entered, the scent of polished wood, ink, and something faintly metallic hit me. The space was cavernous, silent except for the soft murmur of voices from clerks and spectators. Every step we took across the marble floor felt monumental, as though we were walking toward not just a courtroom, but a battlefield. I thought of her, the second wife, already inside, perched like a queen on her throne. I imagined her perfectly composed, radiating confidence, surrounded by her expensive lawyers, fully convinced that the judge would favor her claims. My stomach twisted at the thought. She didn't know what we had uncovered. She didn't know that we had the irrefutable evidence proving the land was never hers to claim. And soon, she would. I could feel my pulse in my temples. My mind kept drifting back to the morning I discovered the deeds, the faded ink, the brittle pages that carried the history of our family. How I had sat cross-legged in the dusty attic, tracing every line with trembling fingers, reading each word aloud to my siblings, repeating it over and over until it became a lifeline. Those papers were more than documents, they were proof, power, and redemption rolled into fragile sheets of paper. As we approached the bench to meet our lawyer, I noticed the flicker of unease in her eyes. Not the fear that would give her away, but the sharp focus of a professional who knew the stakes. She went through each folder meticulously with us, highlighting points, rehearsing answers, and reminding us to stay calm, composed, and unwavering. "Remember," she said quietly, leaning close, "confidence is key. Do not let her intimidation get to you. Speak clearly. Stay united. And above all, believe in the truth. It will guide you." Her words settled over me like a shield. I nodded, though my chest still felt tight. My siblings murmured their own reassurances, whispering strategies, reinforcing each other's courage. We were a family on the precipice, ready to confront a storm decades in the making. Then came the moment to step into the courtroom proper. The doors opened, and the high-ceilinged room swallowed us whole. The walls were lined with dark wood panels, polished to a shine that reflected the light in slanted patterns. The gallery was filling slowly, spectators murmuring quietly among themselves, but my eyes were fixed on the front. There she was, my father's second wife, sitting with perfect posture, her expression one of icy composure. The arrogance in her eyes was palpable, and I felt a surge of rage rise inside me. I reminded myself to breathe. One step at a time. Focus. The judge entered, robes flowing, the gavel in hand. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Every heartbeat seemed to echo through the room. This was it. Years of preparation, every late night, every dusty attic search, every whispered strategy, it all came down to this moment. The opposing lawyer began first, outlining her claims with a smooth, practiced voice. I could see her whispering to the second wife occasionally, nodding, gesturing toward the judge. Their confidence was suffocating, but it was also brittle. Every assertion they made was another opportunity to demonstrate the truth. I glanced at my siblings. My sister's hands were clenched, my brother's jaw tight. We were all aware of the stakes. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt the same fire that had burned in the attic that night. This was not just about property, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen, asserting the legitimacy of our existence, and honoring generations of ancestors who had fought for this land. The first objections came quickly. Her lawyer challenged our documents, questioned the authenticity of the deeds, and attempted to paint our family as opportunistic and reckless. But our lawyer was ready. Every counterpoint had been anticipated, every loophole foreseen. Witnesses were called, neighbors who remembered my father's original intentions, distant relatives who could attest to the lineage of ownership, even the notary who had overseen historical land transfers. Each testimony was a strike against her claim, each affirmation a nail in the coffin of her arrogance. I could feel my pulse accelerating with every word spoken. The courtroom became a battlefield, every glance, every gesture, every subtle reaction laden with meaning. I watched her face closely. At first, it was calm, unreadable. Then, imperceptibly, cracks appeared, a brief narrowing of her eyes, a slight twitch of her lips. She was realizing, slowly, that the truth we had brought could not be denied. The moment we stepped further into the courtroom, I felt the weight of history press down on me. The polished wooden floors reflected our footsteps, each echo bouncing back with a sense of gravity I had never experienced before. The spectators were slowly filling in. A mix of distant relatives, curious neighbors, and a scattering of strangers, but their presence barely registered. My eyes were fixed on her, the second wife, poised and perfect, exuding the kind of confidence that comes from money, power, and the belief that the law bends in your favor. Her gaze met mine briefly, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't fear, it was a cocktail of anger, resolve, and the simmering satisfaction of knowing that every paper in my folder, every deed we had unearthed, would soon expose the fragility behind her arrogance. Our lawyer leaned close to us, whispering final instructions. Stay calm. Speak when necessary. Let the evidence do the talking. Remember, truth has power. I nodded, though inside I felt a hurricane of emotions. The fear of failure mingled with righteous anger, and determination surged like electricity through my veins. We had come this far. Every dusty attic search, every argument we rehearsed, every painstaking verification of historical deeds had led to this moment. We were ready. The judge entered, robes flowing, gavel in hand, and the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation. As he took his seat, I could feel the tension in my chest tighten, the weight of years of abandonment and injustice pressing on me. This was no longer about papers or land, it was about dignity, family, and the reckoning we had been preparing for. The opposing lawyer rose first. She was a sharp, elegant woman, her voice smooth and practiced, outlining the second wife's claims with precision. Every word was designed to undermine us, questioning the authenticity of documents, insinuating greed, painting our family as desperate and opportunistic. She spoke with a confidence that made my stomach churn. But I reminded myself, her confidence was not truth. And we had the truth. I glanced at my siblings. My eldest sister's hands were clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes unwaveringly fixed on the lawyer. My youngest brother was leaning forward slightly, his jaw set. We drew strength from each other, a silent bond that had been forged through years of shared hardship and betrayal. Then came the first objections. She challenged our documents, claiming that some of the deeds might have been forged, that signatures could be disputed. My heart thudded wildly as our lawyer rose, her voice steady but firm. Your Honor, these documents have been verified, notarized, and cross-referenced with government records. We have witnesses who can confirm the authenticity and lineage of these properties. I felt a surge of relief but also a heightened sense of vigilance. This was the first round, but many battles lay ahead. Every question, every objection, could alter the course of this confrontation. The tension was thick, and every glance around the courtroom felt loaded with meaning. The witnesses were called one by one. First, a neighbor who had lived next door to our family for decades, who remembered my father and the land long before the second wife entered the picture. Her voice was calm but resolute. The land has always belonged to the children of this family, she testified. No transfer to any other party was ever discussed or approved. I watched the second wife's eyes flicker momentarily, a micro-expression I caught, a hint of unease beneath her practiced composure. My heart leapt. This was the first crack in her armor, the first sign that our preparation was working. Next came a distant cousin, someone I had spent hours with reviewing old family records. He spoke with authority, recounting conversations and documented evidence about the property's lineage. Each detail he provided seemed to tighten the noose around her claim. The courtroom air grew heavier with anticipation, every word echoing the truth we had carried with us into this room. Then, we called the notary who had overseen the historical transactions, a frail man whose hands shook slightly as he spoke but whose testimony carried undeniable weight. I was present when these deeds were signed and verified, he said. The property in question has always been under the ownership of the original family line. There was never a legitimate transfer to the second wife or her late husband's estate. I swallowed hard, feeling the tension inside me tighten. Each statement, each piece of evidence, felt like a strike, dismantling the elaborate narrative she had tried to construct. And yet, I reminded myself to stay vigilant. There would be more challenges ahead, surprises we couldn't anticipate, attempts to twist the truth, and the unpredictable nature of human judgment. The second wife's lawyer attempted to counter, questioning the credibility of witnesses, raising technicalities, and suggesting that the documents might not hold under legal scrutiny. I clenched my fists, listening, waiting for our lawyer to respond with the precision we had rehearsed. And she did. Every challenge was met with a measured, methodical answer. Every attempt to intimidate or confuse was countered with calm authority. As each piece of evidence was presented, I felt the tide turning. The second wife's arrogance began to show subtle cracks, a brief tightening of her lips, a faint furrow of her brow, a fleeting hesitation that betrayed the confidence she had worn like armor. My pulse quickened at each moment. We were proving that truth could not be denied, that legacy, history, and justice were on our side. And yet, even as small victories mounted, the tension was unbearable. Every pause, every turn of the page, every questioning glance from the judge felt amplified. The courtroom became a theater of suspense, each moment pregnant with potential disaster or triumph. I reminded myself silently, focus on the evidence, trust in our preparation, and draw strength from the family that had stood together through abandonment, hardship, and betrayal. As the first major piece of evidence, the original family deed maps, was presented, a hush fell over the room. I could see the judge leaning forward, eyes scanning the documents meticulously. The gallery seemed to hold its collective breath. My fingers ached as I gripped my folder, but I refused to look away. The maps, delicate and yellowed with age, represented the culmination of years of work, a visual testament to our claim. The second wife's confident composure faltered ever so slightly as the judge examined the maps. She whispered to her lawyer, an almost imperceptible sign of doubt flickering across her features. I allowed myself a small, silent smile. The tide was turning. We continued presenting evidence, calling additional witnesses, friends of the family, former employees, and even historians familiar with the ancestral records. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an unassailable chain of truth. I could feel the energy shift in the courtroom, a tangible movement from doubt to recognition. And through it all, I remained acutely aware of the stakes. One misstep, one poorly worded answer, one lapse in composure, could undo everything. But my siblings and I were united, each of us attuned to the other's expressions, offering silent support, absorbing the tension together. By the end of this section, I felt a flicker of hope, tempered by caution. The courtroom was still an unpredictable arena, and while the evidence was on our side, the final verdict remained uncertain. The second wife's resistance had begun to crumble, but she still had resources, lawyers, and a determination to cling to what she thought she deserved. As the judge called for a brief recess, the tension inside me tightened further. The next moments would determine the trajectory of everything we had fought for. Every preparation, every discovery, every sacrifice had led to this point. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the most critical moments were still to come. As the recess ended, I felt my stomach tighten with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The courtroom felt like a living entity, the polished wood seemed to hum under the weight of history and expectation, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows casting angular shadows across the floor. Every sound, every movement was magnified in my senses. I could hear the faint rustle of papers, the tap of pens against desks, and even the barely audible intake of breath from those seated in the gallery. The judge called the court to order, his gavel striking with a sharp, definitive sound. My pulse quickened. This was it, the stage upon which all of our preparation, research, and sweat would finally collide with reality. Our lawyer stood, confidence radiating in a calm, deliberate way that belied the storm of tension beneath. "I would like to present the first piece of evidence," she began, her voice steady, deliberate. "These documents include the original deeds and property maps, dated and notarized decades ago, establishing the lineage and ownership of the ancestral land in question." I leaned forward slightly, my hands clutching the folder in front of me. Each map, each paper, was a testament to years of labor, late-night research, and dusty attic discoveries. My fingers tingled as though they were alive with electricity, each sheet carrying the weight of generations. The first map was unrolled carefully, and I could see the faint lines marking boundaries, the names of ancestors written in ink that had faded to sepia over the decades. I felt a lump in my throat as I traced the lines with my eyes, imagining the hands that had drawn them, imagining my father's siblings working these lands, tending them with care and pride. The second wife's expression remained composed, but there was a flicker, a slight narrowing of her eyes, a tightness around her lips. I noticed the almost imperceptible clench of her jaw. This was the first crack in her armor, the first hint that our preparation was working. Witnesses were called next. First, an elderly neighbor who had known our family for decades. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the stand, but her voice was firm. "I have lived next door to this family my entire life," she testified. "The land has always belonged to the children of this family. No transfer to the second wife, or any party outside this lineage, was ever authorized." I could feel the tension in the room shift subtly. Her words carried weight, credibility, and authority. I glanced at my siblings, their eyes reflected the same mix of relief and anticipation I felt. The second wife leaned slightly forward, whispering urgently to her lawyer, her composure flickering ever so slightly. Next came a distant cousin, someone I had spent hours with reviewing historical documents. His testimony was meticulous, recounting dates, signatures, and lineage with clarity. Every detail he provided reinforced the legitimacy of our claim. I could feel my chest tighten as I absorbed the magnitude of the moment. Each piece of evidence, each witness statement, chipped away at the facade the second wife had constructed. Then came the notary who had overseen the original land transfers decades ago. He was frail, his hands shaking as he lifted the documents, but his voice carried the unmistakable authority of experience. "I witnessed the proper notarization and verification of these deeds," he said slowly. The property in question has always remained within the original family lineage. There was no legitimate transfer to the second wife or her late husband's estate. I swallowed hard, feeling the tension coil tighter around me. Every statement, every document, every line of ink added to the unstoppable force we had become. The courtroom was a chessboard, and each move we made was calculated with precision. But the second wife was not finished. Her lawyer rose to challenge the witnesses, questioning their memory, suggesting that the documents might have been tampered with. I felt a wave of anxiety, my heart hammering. But our lawyer was ready, countering each point with evidence, cross-references, and corroborating statements. Every attempt to discredit us only highlighted the thoroughness of our preparation. At one point, the second wife herself rose to speak. Her voice was sharp, authoritative, but I noticed a subtle tremor, barely perceptible, but there nonetheless. "These claims are exaggerated," she said, glancing at the judge. "The documents are outdated, and the witnesses are biased. My husband had every right to transfer the property as he saw fit." I felt a surge of suppressed anger. Every word she spoke was a lie, a deliberate attempt to twist reality. I could feel my blood boil, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Our evidence was stronger than her words. Truth was our weapon, and we had it in abundance. The gallery was silent, everyone leaning forward in anticipation. I could hear the subtle rustle of papers, the occasional cough, and the soft click of a pen. Every sound seemed amplified, adding to the cinematic intensity of the moment. The judge's gaze shifted between her and our lawyer, his expression unreadable, his body language deliberate. Then came the moment that made my pulse nearly stop. Our lawyer presented the final piece of evidence, the original property maps preserved by my grandmother, showing the exact boundaries of the ancestral land and the rightful heirs. The room went silent. Even the second wife seemed momentarily stunned, her eyes widening slightly. I held my breath as the judge leaned forward, scanning the maps with a deliberate, methodical precision. The gallery seemed to hold its collective breath. I imagined every ancestor, every hand that had tended this land, watching silently over us. This was more than property. This was the essence of our family, our history, our identity. Witness after witness reinforced the claim. Friends, distant relatives, and historians familiar with the property's history all spoke with authority. Each testimony added a new layer of certainty, a new nail in the coffin of the second wife's claims. I could feel the tension in the room shift. Her arrogance, once unshakable, was beginning to crumble. Yet even as the small victories mounted, the fear of the unknown lingered. The judge had not yet made a ruling, and every moment of silence felt like an eternity. I reminded myself to breathe, to focus, to stay present. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope, a flicker of vindication. I glanced at my siblings. My eldest sister's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. My youngest brother's jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists of quiet determination. We had come so far, and the truth was finally shining through the darkness. As the evidence presentation concluded, the courtroom buzzed with subdued tension. The second wife's lawyer attempted a few last-minute objections, but our lawyer dismantled them with calm authority. I could see the frustration mounting on her face, subtle gestures, tightened lips, a flicker of panic in her eyes. And through it all, I remained painfully aware of the stakes. One misstep, one unforeseen objection, one flaw in our testimony could undo everything. The suspense was almost unbearable, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, the judge called for a brief recess. My stomach churned as we filed out, hearts pounding. The battle was not over, but a major front had been won. I could see the doubt beginning to take root in the second wife's demeanor. For the first time, I felt the exhilarating mix of relief and anticipation that only comes from standing on the edge of justice. As we left the courtroom, I whispered to my siblings, "This is only the beginning. The real test is still ahead. But the tide is turning. She can no longer hide from the truth. The courtroom had returned from recess, and the tension was thicker than ever. Every breath I took felt like it could be heard across the room. My siblings and I took our seats, clutching our folders, hearts hammering in unison. The second wife sat across from us, her expression still calm but now laced with a subtle, almost imperceptible tightness. For the first time, I noticed how her confident veneer was beginning to crumble. As the judge called the proceedings back to order, I felt a wave of anticipation wash over me. This was the moment where everything would either come together or unravel completely. The second wife's lawyer made a few more objections, citing technicalities and questioning witness credibility. I felt my chest tighten with anxiety, but our lawyer remained composed, responding methodically, dismantling every argument with precision. Then, the second wife herself stood. I could hear the soft rustle of her dress as she walked toward the judge. Her voice, though steady at first, had an edge that betrayed her growing frustration. "Your Honor, these claims are exaggerated," she said, glancing briefly at us. "The documents presented are outdated. My husband had every right to transfer the property as he wished." I felt a surge of anger and disbelief, but I forced myself to remain calm. Every lie she spoke was another opportunity to reveal the truth, and I could feel that fire in me growing stronger. My hands tightened around my folder as I imagined all the years of abandonment, every moment of doubt, every injustice that had led to this confrontation. Our lawyer stood, her voice firm but composed. "Your Honor, the deeds and documents presented are verified, notarized, and corroborated by multiple independent witnesses. The property in question has never been legitimately transferred to the second wife or her late husband's estate. The evidence is clear, consistent, and irrefutable." I could feel the tension in the room reaching a peak. Every person in the gallery was silent, watching, waiting. I glanced at my siblings. My eldest sister's eyes were bright with determination, my youngest brother's jaw tight with silent fury. We had fought for this moment, and now it was unfolding before us, minute by minute, piece by piece. The second wife's face betrayed the first real flicker of fear I had seen all day. Her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes darting toward our documents, then back at the judge. I felt a surge of satisfaction, tempered by caution. This wasn't over yet. Even the smallest error could tip the scales. The judge called for additional witnesses, a historian who had researched the family lineage and property ownership. The man approached the stand with a stack of meticulously organized notes. "I have spent years studying property records in this region," he began. "The documentation presented by the plaintiffs aligns perfectly with historical records, showing a continuous line of ownership within the family. No evidence supports any claim by the second wife or her late husband's estate." I could feel my chest tighten, a mix of pride and tension. Every word validated our struggle, every sentence chipped away at the false narrative she had tried to construct. The second wife's lawyer attempted to interject, but the judge raised a hand, signaling him to wait. The gallery seemed to hold its collective breath. Then came a small but powerful revelation. Our lawyer presented a series of letters, personal correspondence from my father before he abandoned us. The letters detailed his intentions regarding the land, emphasizing that it was not to be sold or transferred without the family's consent. The second wife's confident composure faltered noticeably as the letters were read aloud, her eyes narrowing, jaw tightening, her hands fidgeting slightly. I could barely focus on anything else. Every sentence of those letters felt like a vindication of our struggle. I imagined my father, absent but present in spirit, finally acknowledging the fight we had endured and the truth we had uncovered. It was an emotional surge that made it difficult to sit still, difficult to keep my hands from trembling. The gallery was silent except for the soft voice of our lawyer, guiding the judge through each letter, explaining its significance, and connecting it to the broader evidence. I could feel the momentum shifting unmistakably in our favor. The second wife's previous confidence had begun to crumble completely. I caught a fleeting glance of panic in her eyes, the kind of raw, unmasked fear that only comes when one realizes their position is truly untenable. But even as our small victories accumulated, the final verdict was still unknown. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. I could feel the weight of years of struggle pressing down on me, pressing on my siblings, pressing on the very air itself. Every heartbeat echoed like a drumbeat of anticipation, every tick of the clock amplified into eternity. The judge finally called for a brief recess before delivering the verdict. My stomach churned as we filed out of the courtroom, our steps echoing on the polished floors. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh, almost blinding. I found a quiet corner and closed my eyes, trying to steady my racing heart. I could hear my siblings whispering to each other, their voices tight with suspense and anticipation. I thought of the second wife's mansion, the opulence, the arrogance, the smug certainty that she would walk away with what she wanted. And yet, in my mind's eye, I imagined the moment of her realization, the moment when she would see that all her power, all her money, all her influence could not withstand the truth we had brought into this courtroom. I whispered to myself, almost as a prayer, justice is on our side. The truth will prevail. And you will see it, finally, as we have seen it all along. The courtroom slowly refilled. The second wife took her seat, her face carefully composed once more, though I could sense the tension in her posture. My siblings and I took our seats again, our hands tightly gripping our folders. Every eye in the room seemed to be watching, waiting. Every breath I took felt heavy, loaded with the anticipation of revelation. And then, the judge rose, his expression unreadable, his eyes flicking briefly to the second wife, then to us. I felt my pulse quicken. This was the moment where everything would be determined, the culmination of years of preparation, years of struggle, and years of living with the shadow of abandonment. The gavel struck once more, sharp and deliberate, and the judge began to speak. But I wasn't just defending my business. I was ready to confront her lies face to face. What happened next would shock everyone, and it would change the game forever. Don't miss part 3, because the final showdown is coming, and every mask will fall.